Welcome to the 1000 Nights and 1 Night. Now, when it was the 645th night, she said, It hath reached me, O auspicious king, that Jamrakan, in his battle with Jaramard, slew him, and slew his men, and after taking many prisoners, and much money, and many horses, and loads, sent them with an escort of 1,000 riders to Cufa city. Then he and the army of all Islam dismounted and expounded the saving faith to the prisoners, who made profession with heart and tongue, whereupon they released them from their bonds, and embraced them and rejoiced in them. Then Jamrakan made his troops, who had swelled to a mighty many, rest a day and a night, and marched with the dawn, intending to attack Jaland bin Kakar in the city of Oman, whilst the 1,000 horse fared back to Cufa with the loot. When they reached the city, they went in to King Gharib, and told him what had passed, whereat he rejoiced, and gave them joy, and turned to the Ghul of the mountain, and said, Take horse with 20,000, and follow Jamrakan. So Sidon and his men mounted and set out, amid 20,000 horse for Oman. Meanwhile, the fugitives of the defeated Kafirs reached Oman, and went into Jaland, weeping and crying, Woe and ruin! Whereat he was confounded, and said to them, What calamity hath befallen you? So they told him what had happened, and he said, Woe to you! How many men were they? They replied, O king, there were 20 standards, each 1,000 men. When Jaland heard these words, he said, May the sun pour no blessings on you. Fie upon you! What shall 20,000 overcome you, and you 70,000 horse, and Jaramard able to understand 3,000 in field of fight? Then in the excess of his rage and mortification, he bared his blade, and cried out to those who were present, saying, Fall on them! So the courtiers drew their swords upon the fugitives, and annihilated them to the last man, and cast them to the dogs. Then Jaland cried aloud to his son, saying, Take 100,000 horse, and go to all Iraq, and lay it waste altogether. Now his son's name was Khurajan, and there was no doughtier knight in all the force, for he could charge single-handed 3,000 riders. So he and his host made haste to equip themselves, and marched in battle array, rank following rank, with the prince at their head, and glorifying in himself, and improvising these couplets. I'm all Khurajan, and my name is known, to beat all who in wold or in city wone. How many a soldier my sword at will struck down like a cow on the ground bestrown? How many a soldier I've forced to fly, and have rolled their heads as a ball is thrown? Now I'll drive and harry the land Iraq, and like rain I'll shower the blood of foam, and lay hands on Gharib and his men, whose doom to the wise warning shall soon be shown. The host fared on 12 days' journey, and while they were still marching, behold, a great dust cloud arose before them, and walled the horizon and the whole region. So Khurajan sent out scouts, saying, Go forth, and bring me tidings of what meaneth this dust. They went till they passed under the enemy's standards, and presently returning said, O king, verily this is the dust of the Moslems. Whereat he was glad, and said, Did you count them? And they answered, We counted the colors, and they numbered 20. Quoth he, By my faith, I will not send one man at arms against them, but will go forth to them alone by myself, and strew their heads upon the horses' hooves. Now this was the army of Jamrakan, who was spying the host of the Kafirs, and seeing them as a surging sea, called a halt. So his troops pitched the tents, and set up the standards, calling upon the name of the All-Wise One, the Creator of light and gloom, Lord of all creatures, who seeth while him none see. The high to infinity extolled and exalted be he. There is no God but he. The miscreants also halted, and pitched their tents. And Khurajan said to them, Keep on your arms, and in armor, sleep, for during the last watch of the night we will mount, and trample yonder handful under feet. Now one of Jamrakan's spies was standing nigh, and heard what Khurajan had contrived. So he returned to the host, and told his chief, who said to them, arm yourselves, and as soon as it is night, bring me all the mules and camels, and hang all the bells and clinkets and rattles ye have around their necks. Now, they had with them more than 20,000 camels and mules, so they waited till the infidels fell asleep, when Jamrakan commanded them to mount, and they arose to ride, and on the Lord of the worlds they relied. They said, Jamrakan, drive the camels and the mules to the miscreant camp, and push them with your spears for goads. They did as he bade, and the beasts rushed upon the enemy tents, whilst the bells and the clinkets and the rattles jangled, and the Moslems followed at their heels, shouting, God is most great, till all the hills and mountains resounded with the name of the highmost deity, to whom belong glory and majesty. The cattle, hearing this terrible din, took fright and rushed upon the tents, and trampled the folk as they sleep. And Shahrazad perceived the dawn of the day, and ceased to say her permitted say. Now, when it was the 646th night, she continued, It hath reached me, O auspicious king, that when Jamrakan fell upon them and his men with steeds and camels, the camp lay sleeping, the idolaters started up in confusion, and snatching up their arms fell upon one another, with smiting till the most part was slaughtered. And when the day broke, they looked and found no Moslems slain, but they saw them all on horseback, armed and armored, wherefore they knew that this was a sleight which had been played upon them. And Kurajan cried out to the remnant of his folk, O sons of whores, what we had a mind to do with them, that they have done with us, and their craft hath gotten the better of our cunning. And they were about to charge, when lo and behold, a cloud of dust rose high and walled the horizon sky, when the wind smote it, so that it spired aloft and spread pavilion-wise in the lift, and there it hung, presently appearing beneath it the glint of helmet and gleam of hauberk, and splendid warriors, baldricked with their tempered swords, and holding in rest their supple spears. When the Kafirs saw this, they held back from battle, and each army sent out to know the meaning of this dust scouts, who returned with the news that it was the army of the Moslems. Now, this was the host of the mountain Ghul, whom Gharib had dispatched to Jamrakan's aid, and Sadan himself rode in their van. So the two hosts of the true believers joined company, and rushing upon the Pinmari like a flame of fire, plied them with keen sword, and Rudian spear, and quivering lance, that while the day was darkened and eyes for the must dust starkened. The valiant stood fast, and the faint-hearted coward fled, and to the wilds and the wold's swift speed, whilst the blood over earth was like torrents shed. Nor did they cease from fight till the day took flight, and in gloom came the night. Then the Moslems drew apart from the miscreants, and returned to their tents, where they ate and slept, till the darkness fled away, and gave place to smiling day, when they prayed the dawn prayer, and mounted to battle. Now Kurajan had said to his men as they drew off with fight, for indeed 2/3 of their number had perished by sword and spear, O folk, on tomorrow I will champion it in the stead of war, where cut and thrust jar, and where braves push and wheel. I will take the field. So as soon as light was seen, and morn appeared with its shine and sheen, took horse and host twain, and shouted their slogans amain, and bared the brand, lance in hand, and ranks took stand. The first to open the door of war was Kurajan, who cried out, saying, Let no coward come out to me this day, nor craven. Whereupon Jamrakan and Sadan stood by the colors, but there ran at him a captain of the Banu Amir, and the two drave at each other a while, like two rams butting. Presently Kurajan seized the Moslem by the jerkin under his hauberk, and dragging him from his saddle, dashed him to the ground, where he left him, upon which the Kafirs laid hands on him, and bound him, and bore him off to their tents, whilst Kurajan wheeled about and careened and offered battle, till another captain came out, who also he took prisoner. Nor did he leave to do thus, till he had made prize of 7 captains before midday. Then Jamrakan cried out with so mighty a cry that the whole field made reply, and heard it in the army's train, and ran at Kurajan with a heart in a rageful pain, improvising these couplets. Jamrakan am I, and a man of might, whom the warriors fear with sore affright. I waste the forts, and I leave the walls, to wail and weep for whites I smite. Then, O Kurajan, tread in rightful road, and quit the paths of thy foul unright. Own to the one true God, who dispreads the skies, and made founts to flow, and the hills pegged tight. And the slave embrace the true faith, he'll escape hell's pains, and in heaven be decked and dight. When Kurajan heard these words, he snarked, and he snorted, and he foully abused the sun and the moon, and drave at Jamrakan, versifying with these couplets. I'm Kurajan, of this age the night, and my shade to the presence and my shade to the lions of Shahar is blight. I storm the forts and snare kings of beasts, and warriors fear me in field of flight. Then hearke, Jamrakan, if thou doubt my word, come forth to the combat, and try my might. When Jamrakan heard these verses, he charged him with a stout heart, and they smote each other with swords, till the two hosts lamented for them, and they lunged with lance, great with clamor between them. Nor did they leave fighting till the time of mid-afternoon prayer was past, and the day began to wane. Then Jamrakan drave at Kurajan, and smiting him on the breast with his mace, cast him to the ground, as he were a trunk of a palm tree. And the Moslems pinioned him, and dragged him off with ropes like a camel. Now, when the miscreants saw their prince captive, a hot fever fit of ignorance seized on them, and they bore down upon the true believers, thinking to rescue him. But the Moslem champions met them, and left most of them prostrate on the earth, whilst the rest turned and sought safety in flight, seeking surer sight, while the clanking sabres their backsides smite. The Moslems ceased not pursuing them, till they had scattered them over mount and wold, when they returned from them to the spoil, wherefore was great store of horses and tents and so forth. Good look to it for a spoil. Then Jamrakan went in to Kurajan, and expounded to him all Islam, threatening him with death unless he embraced the faith. But he refused. So they cut off his head, and stuck it on a spear, after which they fared it on towards Oman's city. But as regards the Kafirs and the survivors, returned to Jaland, and made known to him the slaying of his son, and the slaughter of his host, hearing which he cast his crown to the ground, buffeting his face till the blood ran from his nostrils, fell fainting to the ground. They sprinkled rose water on his head, till he came to himself, and cried to his vizier, Write letters to all my governors and nabobs, and bid them leave not a smiter with a sword, nor a lunger with a lance, nor a bender of the bow, but bring them all to me in one body. So he wrote letters, and dispatched them by runners to the governors, who levied their power, and joined the king with the prevailing host, whose number was 180,000 men. Then they made ready tents, and camels, and noble steeds, and were about to march, when behold, up came Jamrakan and Sidon the Ghul with 70,000 horse, as they were lions, fierce-faced, all steel in case. When Jaland saw the Moslems trooping on, he rejoiced and said, By the virtue of the sun and her resplendent light, I will not leave alive one of my foes, nor not one to carry the news, and I will lay waste the land of Al-Arak, that I may take wreck for my son, the havoc-making champion bold, nor shall my fire be quenched or cooled. Then he turned to Ajib and said to him, O dog of Al-Arak, 'twas thou broughtest this calamity on us. But by the virtue of that which I worship, except I avenge me of mine enemy, I will do thee die a foulest fashion. When Ajib heard these words, he was troubled with sore trouble, and blamed himself, but he waited till nightfall, when the Moslems had pitched their tents for rest. Now he had been degraded, and expelled the royal camp together, and those who were left to him of his suite. So he said to them, O my kinsmen, know that Jaland and I are dismayed with exceeding dismay at the coming of the Moslems, and I know that he will not avail to protect me from my brother, nor from any other. So it is my counsel that we make our escape while all eyes asleep, and flee to King Gharib bin Katan, for that he hath more of men and is stronger of rein. They, hearing his advice, exclaimed, Right is thy rede. Whereupon he bade them kindle fires at their tent doors and march under cover of the night. They did his bidding and set out, so by daybreak they had already fared far away. As soon as it was morning, Jaland mounted, and 260,000 fighting men clad in a capapai, in habricks and cuirasses, and straight-knit mail coats, the kettle drums, beat a point of war, and all drew out for cut and thrust, and fight and fray. Then Jamrakan and Sidon rode out with 40,000 stalwart fighting men under each standard, 1,000 cavaliers, doughty champions, foremost in Champagne. The two hosts drew out in battles, and bared their blades and levelled their limber lances for the drinking of the cup of death. The first to open the gate of strife was Sidon, as he were a mountain of cyanide or a morid of the jinn. Then dashed out to him a champion of the infidels, and the Ghul slew him, casting him to the earth, and cried out to his sons and slaves, saying, Light the fire, and roast me this dead one. They did as he bade, and he brought him the roast, and he ate it, and he crunched the bones, whilst the Kafirs stood looking on them from afar, and they cried out, Oh, for the aid from the living-giving Son! And they were affrighted at the thought of being slain by Sidon. Then Jaland shouted to his men, saying, Slay me yonder loathsome beast. Whereupon another captain of his host drove at the Ghul, but he slew him. And he ceased not to slay horseman after horseman, till he had made an end of 30 men. When this, the blamed Kafirs held back and feared to face him, crying, Who shall cope with jinns and ghouls? But Jaland raised his voice, saying, Let me 100 horse charge him, and bring him to me bound or slain. So 100 horse set upon Sidon with swords and spears, and he met them with a heart firmer than flint, proclaiming the unity of the requiting king, whom no one thing diverteth from other thing. Then he cried aloud, Allahu Akbar, and smiting them with his sword, made their heads fly, and in one onset he slew of them 74, whereupon the rest took to flight. So Jaland shouted aloud to 10 of his captains, each commanding 1,000 men, and said to them, Shoot his horse with arrows till it fall from under him, and they lay hands on him. Therewith 10,000 horses drove at Sidon, who met them with a stout heart. And Jamrakan, seeing this, bore down upon the miscreants with his Moslems, crying out, God is most great. Before they could reach the Ghul, the enemy had slain his steed and taken him prisoner. But they ceased not to charge the infidels till the day grew dark, for dust and eyes were blinded, and the sharp swords clanged, while firm stood the valiant cavalier, and destruction overtook the faint-hearted in his fear, till the Moslems were amongst the Panims like a white patch on a black bull. And Shahrazad perceived the dawn of the day, and ceased saying her permitted say. Now, when it was the 647th night, she pursued, It hath reached me, O auspicious king, that battle raged between the Moslems and the Panims, till the true believers were like a white patch on a black bull. Nor did they stint from the melee till the darkness fell down, when they drew apart, after there had been slain of the infidels men without count. Then Jamrakan and his men returned to their tents, but they were in great grief for Sidon, so that neither meat nor sleep was sweet to them, and they counted their hosts, and found that they had less than 1,000 had been slain. But Jamrakan said, O folk, tomorrow I will go forth into the battle plain, and place where cut and thrust obtain, and slay their champions, and make prize of their families after taking them captives. And I will ransom Sidon therewith, by the leave of the requiting king, whom no one thing diverteth the other. Wherefore their hearts were heartened, and they joyed as they separated to their tents. Meanwhile Jaland entered his pavilion, and sitting down on his sofa of estate, and his folks about him, called for Sidon, and forthright on his coming said to him, O dog, run wood and least of the Arab brood, and carrier of firewood, who was it slew my son, Kurajan, the brave of the age, slayer of heroes, and caster down of warriors. Quoth the Ghul, Jamrakan slew him, captain of the armies of King Gharib, prince of the cavaliers, and I roasted and ate him, for I was an hungered. When Jaland heard these words, his eyes sank into his head for rage, and he bade his sword bearer smite Sidon's neck. So he came forward in that intent, whereupon Sidon stretched himself mightily and burst his bonds, snatched the sword from the headsman, and hewed off his head. Then he made it Jaland, who threw himself down from the throne and fled, while Sidon fell on the bystanders and killed 20 of the king's chief officers, and all the rest took to flight. Therewith loud rose the cry in the camp of the infidels, and the Ghul sallied forth of the pavilion, and falling upon the troops, smote them with the sword right and left, till they opened and left a lane for him to pass, nor did he cease to press forward, cutting at them on either side, till he won free of the miscreants' tents, and made for the Moslem camp. Now these had heard the uproar among their enemies, and said, Haply some calamity hath befallen them. But whilst they were in perplexity, behold, Sidon stood amongst them, and they rejoiced at his coming, and exceeding joy, more especially Jamrakan, who saluted him with the salam, as did the other true believers, and gave him joy of his escape. Such was the case with the Moslems. But as regards the miscreants, when after the Ghul's departure they and their king returned to their tents, Jaland said to them, O folk, by the virtue of the sun's lighting-giving ray, and by the darkness of the night, and the light of the day, and the stars that stray, I thought not this day to have escaped death in melee. For had I fallen into yonder fellow's hands, he had eaten me, as if I were a kernel of corn, or barley corn, or any other grain. They replied, O king, never saw we any do the like of this Ghul. And he said, O folk, tomorrow do ye all don arms, and mount steed, and trample them under your horses' hoofs. Meanwhile the Moslems had ended their rejoicing at Sidon's return, and Jamrakan said to them, Tomorrow I will show you my daring do, and what behoveth the like of me, for by the virtue of Abraham the friend, I will slay them with the foulest of slaughters, and smite them with the bite of the sword, till all who have understanding confounded at them shall stand. But I mean to attack both right and left wings. So when you see me drive at the king under the standards, do ye charge behind me with a resolute charge, and Allah's it is to decree what things shall be. Accordingly, the two sides lay upon their arms, till the day broke through night, and the sun appeared to sight. Then they mounted swiftlier, and the twinkling of the eyelid, the raven of the wold, croaked, and the two hosts, looking each at other with the eye of fascination, formed in line array, and prepared for fight and fray. The first to open the chapter of war was Jamrakan, who wheeled and careered and offered fight in field. And Jaland and his men were about to charge, when behold, a cloud of dust uprolled till it walled the wold and overlaid the day. Then the four winds smote it, and away it floated, torn to rags, and there appeared beneath it cavaliers with helms black and garb white, and many a princely knight, and lances that bite, and swords that smite, and footmen who lion-like knew no affright. Seeing this, both armies left fighting and sent out scouts to find out and report who thus had come in main and might. So they went, and within the dust cloud appeared from sight, and returned after a while, and the news arrived that the approaching host was one of the Moslems under the command of King Gharib. When the true believers heard from the scouts of the coming of their king, they rejoiced, and driving out to meet him, dismounted and kissed the earth between his hands. And Shahrazad perceived the dawn of the day, and ceased to say her permitted say. And so do I cease the telling of my tale for today, till it be morrow.